We are about to start the opening panel. Its title is National Narratives and Conceptualizations of Freedom. And I can promise that we will examine all elements of this title. We're going to talk about narratives, national narratives. We're going to discuss the question of freedom and how freedom can be a leading narrative. And also, we're going to talk about how the notion of freedom can be presented in exhibitions and different institutions. My name is Dorottya Baczoni, and it is my honor to moderate this panel discussion. And we have 4 distinguished guests from 4 different institutions and 4 different countries as well. First, I would like to introduce Robert Kostro, who is our host and the coordinator of the event from the Polish History Museum. Barbara Glück from Austria, from the Mauthausen Memorial. Simina Badica from the House of European History, Brussels. And last but not least, Audrey Whitty from Ireland, from the National Library of Ireland. Thank you for being here with us today and for accepting the invitation. And I have a plan, and according to this plan, there would be 3 major parts of the discussion. First, each panelist would get a few minutes to present the most important thoughts on this topic. So just very, very briefly, in approximately 3 minutes. After that, I would have a few questions for you. And in the last half an hour, we would open the discussion and the audience would have the opportunity to ask. This is the plan, and we will see what happens. So first, I would like to ask Robert Kostro to present his most important ideas. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to me to participate in this conference. We find ourselves in the museum, which is still not completed because we are working on the permanent exhibition. But one of the main topics or actually the main topics of our permanent exhibition will be freedom, which is very much connected with the topic and with the theme of the symposium. But freedom, it does mean many various things. So if I may ask for this presentation, is anyone who... Oh, yes, okay, this is already. So this is a picture of our first temporary exhibition with which we started our activities in September past year. On the first, in foreground, you see a sculpture by Polish sculptor Bednarski, which is a reference to solidarity and also to the martial law, because the sculpture was made during early 80s, which is one of the important items that we have in our collection. May I have another? Yes? New slide? Okay, thank you. Another important space in our museum will be for the permanent exhibition. Can I have this? Thank you. Will be a space devoted to election of Polish kings. Poland, or Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, actually, was a special country where kings were elected from 1573. And this is also reflects sort of republican idea that all nobility, that all citizens at that time, they were around 10% of the population, could participate in the political process. So election of the king was a very important part of the political process. This is one of the meanings of the notion of freedom in our exhibition. Another good example of what we can understand under the notion of freedom is freedom of conscience. Another important document, also from the same period of time, 1573. This is the period of election, shortly before election of the first Polish king, was the Act of the Confederation of Warsaw. Confederation of Warsaw was a tolerance act because we had at that time very many denominations, many religions in Poland. So the participant of Sejm, of the nobility, agreed that nobody will be forced to change his confession. It was important because the future king should be French. At the same time, as you probably know, there was the famous Bartholomew's Night in Paris when the Protestants were killed by Catholics. Another important element of what we understand under freedom is independence of the country. So I have here two items. One is uniform from the period of the Duchy of Warsaw, created by Napoleon Bonaparte. It was part of Polish struggle for independence in the 19th century. And another example is underground publication from 1942. Actually, this is poetry by Krzysztof Kamil Baczyński, excellent poet who unfortunately died during the Warsaw Rising 1944. And I'm close to the end. Another example of what we can understand under freedom is political freedom, freedom of speech. And this is very important, especially for my generation, which participated in the opposition. And we have many items connected with this, but very important to us is the gate of the Gdańsk shipyard, where there were the strikes in 1980, in August 1980, which led to create solidarity movement. And another important artifact to us is the monument of Felix Dzierżyński, which actually was brought down in November 1989, so it was symbolical end of the communism in Poland. We will have this monument in our permanent exhibition, but we will not restore to the original position, but he will be falling down from the base of the monument. And finally, this is the last slide that I have to you. This is the document of the Union of Lublin, which is important to us, especially because most of us come from the countries of the European Union. This is a very interesting example of union of two countries, which actually had started in end of 16th century, but there was also a union of dynastical union, which started even in the late 14th century and ended up only in 18th century. So many centuries we were with unity with Lithuania, and it was quite a good experience in Polish, and I hope also Lithuanian history. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now, Barbara.
So I think I also need the button to go further. So thank you very much for the invitation, coming here to conference and being part of this panel here. And honestly, I have to say that I think this is the wrong. That's you. Please, can you switch to my presentation? There are only 4 slides.
Or shall we change to Simina?
Glück. Well, yes, this is Mauthausen. And honestly, I have to say that the invitation was also an opportunity for me for a personal thinking about freedom related to Mauthausen. And I picked out 3 thoughts I would like to share with you. The first is this iconic symbol of freedom. When we talk about liberation of Mauthausen, we see this picture, we have this picture in our mind. So actually this picture was taken 2 days after the liberation, because when they realized what really happened on May 5th, they did a kind of staging to take the picture of the liberation. And this picture is the symbol of the liberation of Mauthausen and Gusen and more than 40 subcamps, where 190,000 people were deported and brutally forced to slavery work, and half of them were murdered. And this picture still today plays a role in many different narratives. And we will talk about these narratives. And this is also a symbol where Mauthausen unites all these different memories. And so I would like to say, for me, this picture is a symbol of somehow a united narrative of Mauthausen. Second, I would like to talk about the expressions of freedom in our exhibitions. Here, freedom is essentially conceptualized as a freedom from captivity, a freedom from slavery, and a freedom from violence. And on a micro level, however, freedom is conceived of as a space which had to be fought for and conquered by prisoners on an everyday level. When we think of any creation of art in the camp, drawings, music, poetry, this is expression of individual freedom. This is individual freedom. Or when we think of collective efforts, creating spaces of freedom, acts of solidarity, building structures of resistance among different prisoner groups. And I have here some examples of individual objects telling many different stories of individual feelings of freedom. I would like to mention only one. Out of them, you can see Pavel Branko. He's a survivor. He's still alive, living in Hungary. And maybe you can realize the chest field in the vitrine over there. He says this was his kind of secret to survive in the camp. He managed it. We don't know how. He managed it to build, not the chest field, to build the chest figures during his time in the camp to play from time to time with another prisoner. And for him, it was his secret to survive. And after the liberation, he went back home to Hungary, and then he came back to donate the chest field to us, to the memorial. And he said, so please tell my story. And this is his individual sign of freedom. And I think this is how we have to build up and to show all the items in our exhibitions, to give them their place to tell the story. And third, I would like to talk about freedom as a today's value in our commemoration efforts. And here we would like to mention Gusen, a place, the concentration camp, very close to Mauthausen, 2-3 kilometers, which had a totally different development to Mauthausen. Mauthausen was very early built up as a memorial, 1949, and Gusen was, in Austrians' mind, totally neglected. And on the place, of the former concentration camp. On the same place, family houses were built up, and we have today the community of Langenstein on the place of the concentration camp. People living there in their houses, and sometimes in the historical buildings of the concentration camp. And it happened that 3 years ago, the Republic of Austria purchased some land with very important places of the former concentration camp, with many, many, many initiatives behind that decision. Also the initiative, the strong initiative from Poland. And the areas were the former roll call area, so the former Appellplatz, the stone broker and SS barracks. And we became responsible to build up a new memorial. And it would have been definitely the wrong decision to go there, to plan, to build, and to open a memorial. That would have been the wrong decision. So what we did is we invited everybody on the same table. Our neighbors, our new neighbors with their gardens and their swimming pools close to our roll call area, the local community, all the national representatives and international communities, survivor communities, to come together on one table and to discuss, what does it mean? What is Gusen for us today, for each of us? And then we discussed values. And one of these values is freedom, or is respect. And so this participation process has been for the last 2 years. And what we have now is a booklet, we have ideas, we have plans, we have the design, what Gusen should look like. And we're sure we have not 100% of each of us. It's a compromise. But it's not a single decision. It's not a single decision of a narrative. It's a common sense, and it's a participation. And this is a really huge sign of freedom on that former killing site in Gusen. And I would like to close with this picture. It was a couple of weeks ago at our liberation ceremony on the former roll call area, here together. And I have, I would like to bring Stanislav Zalewski, a Polish survivor. I need my glasses. And he mentioned a really strong sentence I would like to share with you, and then I'm finished. And Stanislav Zalewski said, "I hope that this memorial will hold strong against the winds of history, namely to socio-political changes that are taking place all over the world, and that all present and future nations and generations may understand this place." Thank you.
Thank you very much. Simina, you're next.
Okay, this is working. Good morning, everyone, and thank you to the organizers for having the House of European History here. I'm in the curators team of the House of European History. I will try to be very brief. The echo is a bit disturbing, I must say. I don't know how you hear it, but I will show you a very short film, a 90 seconds presentation of our museum, because as we are a quite young museum, we opened in 2017. I don't think many of you had a chance to see it. So I'll show you a short video and then just a few words about how we conceptualize this actually grand narrative of European history. So I think for us the topic of are we still able to tell grand narratives in museum is very, very topical, and we are dealing with it in, I think, interesting ways. And the topic of freedom, of course, as we are a museum of mainly 20th century European history, it's also an important topic for us. So let's see if I can do it from here. If not...
Here is the seat of empires, the birthplace
and the grave of civilizations.
Here are gods, dictatorships, and democracy. Here are the far-reaching winds of untamed power.
The power to harm.
And to heal.
You are thinkers
And fighters. And artists.
And writers. The pomp of royalty.
The surge of revolution.
The spark of rebirth.
Here is the courage to explore, the freedom to discover,
The right to be. Here is the apocalypse of war.
and the birdsong of peace.
Here are memories that can never fade.
Here is doubts
and division
and division
and suspicion.
and suspicion.
Hope and unity. Crisis and controversy and cruelty.
Here are the riches of history, the possibilities of tomorrow.
Made by ideas,
Shaped by traditions,
sustained by people.
Here is our story.
Thank you. Next slide. I think I can do it. Yeah. So, as I said, the museum opened in 2017 after a 10-year decade of work on the building and, of course, on the narrative. The main challenges we faced were the fact that we wanted to tell a transnational history of Europe, and this does not mean that we put together national histories and hope that they make sense. We also wanted to tell the story in the 24 official languages of the European Union. Maybe you could see in the film that some of the visitors had a tablet in their hand. This was the solution that we found to the 24 language issue, because you can visit the House of European History in 24 languages, but you need to do it with a tablet where you choose your mother tongue, and we have no texts in the exhibition space, which is both a blessing and also it can be sometimes a problem. But and also we started without a museum collection, which many new museums must have faced. But I think that the solutions that came from these problems and challenges have become the identity of the museum. So we shaped our discourse, our identity, and I think we turned them into, as they say, opportunities. So we needed to find clear criteria for the themes that are present in our permanent exhibition, and one of the main criteria is that the events and processes. So we present events and processes which have originated in Europe, which have expanded over the continent, and which are still relevant today. As I say, we mainly focused on the 20th century with, let's say, roots in the 19th, and in temporary exhibitions we can go much further back in time. We now have a temporary exhibition on the 30 Years' War, but in the permanent exhibition is mainly the history of the 20th century. The multilingual tablet is one of the solutions, and also the fact that we have objects on loan from 200 institutions in Europe, mainly museums, but not only, which means that we have collaborations with all these institutions, which means that we constantly check our narrative with the museums that we collaborate with. Also, because these objects are on loan, we are also building our collection in the meantime, of course, but we try not to duplicate national collections, so we try to collect objects that also fit certain criteria in European scope. So we have objects on loan, which of course have a time limit to the loan, which means that we constantly renew the objects in our exhibition, which also makes our exhibition, let's say, constantly slightly changing. We are able to add nuances, we are able to add maybe themes that were missing, so it's a quite dynamic process. In the next 2 slides. I will just show 2 examples of how this actually looks. This is a banner from the 1989 Baltic chain. So it's one of my favorite examples where we do talk about freedom. This is actually a screenshot, yes, from our virtual tour, which I invite you to take if you want to get a taste of how the exhibition feels and how we deal with our topics. So the address is down there, it's virtual tour. And here I chose, I think it's Latvian. So just to to give you, sorry? It's Lithuanian, sorry. This is the section about 1989 where we have objects about all the events of this miraculous year. And a quite different topic, but also related to freedom, is from the section on the 1970s where we talk about reproductive rights. This is the 1970s in Western Europe, so it's this whole fight for freedom to choose and to decide about one's body with, as you can see, different posters from different countries. So this is one of the ways we can tell this transnational story. This is, let's say, a movement that has that happened in different countries. So we show similar or sometimes contrasting examples of how this was dealt with. And next to it, you have environmental movements at the same time. There is a lot more to discuss, but I think I will leave it to the discussion. Yes, this was just a preview of taste of how our museum looks like.
We have to move on. Thank you very much. And Audrey.
Very much, Dorottya, and thank you to the ENRS for the invitation to be part of this incredible panel with such distinguished speakers alongside myself. So I just want to say thank you very much. I'm just going to do a brief overview of the National Library of Ireland, which is an incredible institution in every sense, because it was founded under British rule in 1877 under the Dublin Science and Art Museum Act that led to the establishment of both the National Library of Ireland and the National Museum of Ireland. And it was a very good concept at the time in terms of the British authorities of trying to kill the Home Rule movement with kindness. There's such a term in 19th century Irish history of killing Home Rule with kindness, but it spectacularly backfired by the early decades of the 20th century and ultimately led to the formation of an independent Irish state. But I'm using the concept of the National Library itself, both as a building and in terms of its 12 million items of content, as an expression of national narrative. And I'll explain more as this goes on. And I promise I won't go into too much length, even though I have about 14 slides, I'll be pretty fast. So this is the original building that did not open actually until August of 1890, mainly because the competition for an architect had to be held twice, because the first architect wasn't Irish. And that caused a total furore, and they redid the entire competition. But it led to a very good outcome, because Thomas Manley Dean and Thomas Newnham Dean, who are a father and son pair of architects from Cork, won the commission. And it's an extraordinary feat of both European, Irish and British craftsmanship in terms of the interior. You can see, particularly on the left-hand side, the western part of the main building, which sits in Kildare Street in the heart of Dublin City. That is about to go through a major refurbishment project that will open in August of 2027 for the 150th anniversary of the National Library, and will ultimately lead to 6 galleries and floors of exhibitions based on our 12 million items, obviously a very small percentage of that. But it will look at our Nobel laureates in literature, particularly W.B. Yeats and Seamus Heaney. But when I came into this role in February of 2023, I asked the question, well, where are the women? We might have 4 male Nobel laureates in literature from Ireland, but I'm not putting up 6 floors of galleries without female Irish writers and the female aspect of history being incorporated into the main national narrative. So I'll explain that now in more detail. But in terms of the interior space, you can see that it was very much a European powers expression of 19th century and neo-Renaissance, neoclassical architecture. And you can particularly see this in terms of the 12 stained glass windows. They are all men, but also they are all very much of the Greek and Roman tradition. So we have Dante, Virgil, Shakespeare, Corneille, Goethe. We have only one Irishman, Thomas More, represented in the stained glass windows. So even in 1890, this in itself was a statement of, I suppose, the imperial narrative over more indigenous narratives. And I think that is constantly being looked at in terms of how we do the tours of this building, and we always point that out. But the main interior space, as you can see there on the bottom right-hand side, is an iconic reading room. It's one of the most iconic interiors in all of Ireland, the main reading room of the National Library, where James Joyce, William Butler Yeats and Seamus Heaney, Edna O'Brien, many others have sat, contemplated, written, just literally, taken in the place as a sanctuary. We have the Seamus Heaney exhibition up and running in the Bank of Ireland Cultural and Heritage Centre in College Green in Dublin City since 2018, but we can't stay there forever, so that will be incorporated into this new refurbishment. Seamus Heaney, 2 years before he died, very graciously donated his entire archive to the National Library, which is extremely generous when you see, I suppose, the competition that comes particularly from North American institutions when it comes to the literature of Europe and what the Heaney family may have got if they decided not to have donated it to the Irish state. This is our W.B. Yeats exhibition that's been ongoing for the last 16 years, but that will be completely revamped as part of the new series of galleries in the National Library of Ireland in 2027. Just to show you in the original format when it opened in 1890, and this is the decade of James Joyce using the library. There was a prerequisite that the women, and you can see them there in the middle, would use the ladies' reading room, which is now our microfilm reading room. But thanks to the wonders of photographic documentation, we know that they very much ignored that stipulation and very much went into the main reading room and sat amongst their fellow students at the time, usually from the University College Dublin. Now, the National Library of Ireland has very clear statutory obligations. It has to conserve, it has to restore, it has to maintain and enlarge. And like many national libraries and indeed university libraries across the European Union, we have a thing called legal deposit, where we must acquire everything that's published in the state or everything about the state elsewhere, both digitally and in the physical format, and also in terms of web archiving. There's a prerequisite, for instance, of all national libraries to look at their various different countries' domain and keep that as a record. So that has to be interpreted as well by way of exhibition. And just to say again, we had been set up initially in terms of the foundation of our collections going way back to the 18th century through the Royal Dublin Society, which again was very much the ascendancy class in Ireland of the 18th and 19th centuries. But again, incredible work was done, and in the early years between 1877 and 1890, before we had a building, this collection formed by the Royal Dublin Society was actually held in what was Leinster House, which has since become the Irish Parliament. And what was now the Senate or Seanad Chamber, the Senate Chamber, was actually the original National Library of Ireland. So the history of this cultural institution is very much bound up with the history of democracy in Ireland as well. But just to show you that most of these incredible texts from the 18th, 19th, and even going back to the 16th centuries were very much non-Irish based. So much so that this particular space in the library for rare antiquarian books is still referred to as the art room, and there's only one Irish book in the entire canon of that room, which shows you how the collections development policy changed course also between, let's say, 1877 and up to around 1905. Also, we have a prerequisite to collect everything in the Irish language in Gaeilge, and that had a massive effect as well, particularly from the 1890s onwards, in forcing the collections policy to change course and become less imperialistic and more about the indigenous. This is our newly refurbished art room, and the contents of which I've just briefly spoken about, that only opened last year. So it's the original 1890 interior of these books from the Royal Dublin Society. This is our new manuscripts reading room that is, again, a new development in the last year. And then the capital development project itself is the western side there highlighted in left, which faces out onto the main street called Kildare Street. So this is a CGI mock-up of how it's going to look. We will have in the attic space on the left-hand side the Seamus Heaney exhibition, in the basement W.B. Yeats. But it will be based on W.B. Yeats's Nobel acceptance speech in 1923, which was entitled Spirit of the Nation. So we are very much going to look at Yeats and his oeuvre. So the influence and the Celtic revival, the men and women who basically led to Ireland's cultural revival, which ultimately led to the political independence movement. So this is just, again, images of how it'll look in terms of entry. And this is what it was. It was a book repository for 350,000 volumes of books that was only decanted in 2019. So this forestry of shelving will somewhat be removed, although we have major sustainability principles involved in this refurbishment. So we are going to incorporate as much of that as we possibly can without making it too much of a forest. So as you can see there, we have Yeats in the bottom, Heaney on the top, and then in between we are looking at Edna O'Brien in particular, a very famous 20th century Irish writer. Another person is the early 19th century writer Maria Edgeworth, who was heavily involved in famine relief actually in the 1840s. Her last novel, Orlandino, was actually basically done on the proviso that it would provide famine relief in her county Longford, which is where she was based. We also will have the Sir Bob Geldof Band-Aid archive from 1985, so we'll have to look at colonisation issues there. So this is just a summation of the Spirit of the Nation exhibition, which will be in the first level, based on W.B. Yeats's acceptance speech. And this is again a mock-up of what the Seamus Heaney exhibition will look like on the top floor. And again, just to look at the influences in all of their works in terms of the vernacular, particularly in Seamus Heaney's work, the folk tradition, the fact that he was born in Derry, which is technically Northern Ireland, but became this statesman for the whole island of Ireland, and particularly his importance during the peace process. That will all be looked at. And again, looking at just drop-in zones, making it a much more appealing place for people just to hang out. And again, just to show you that our mission is to collect, protect and make available the recorded memory of Ireland, whether it would be a 500-year-old manuscript or a 5-year-old USB key. And that is the way to describe any national library throughout the entire continent of Europe. And just very quickly to show you some of our social media, which again has a national narrative. And a lot of this is dictated by, I suppose, the public. But when Sinead O'Connor passed away last year, for instance, on the left-hand side, we were inundated with requests for quotes by her based on her famous Irish authors. And we have never seen anything like the uptake that it generated on social media. We also, Sean O'Casey, incredible Irish writer, socialist writer of the early 20th century in the middle. And on the right-hand side, the indomitable spirit of Edna O'Brien, who's now 95 years of age and still going strong in terms of producing the most incredible work. So that's it in a nutshell. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for all. I had this very strong feeling before that 3 minutes wouldn't be sufficient, but never mind, because all of the presentations were very useful, and I think we got a pretty good image of what your institution represents and what is your attitude toward narratives and freedom as well. I think, if I understood correctly, there is a consensus that there is need for grand narratives still today. It's not so obvious, I think. And another consensual point, I guess that freedom is crucial somehow, in some way, in that narrative. But let me know if I'm mistaken. But there are so many specificities of your institution, so many differences, different challenges that you face. So now I would like to focus on these special challenges, and I think we should start with the House of European History, because as you have mentioned, Simina, you tried to establish a transnational narrative, not to sum up the national narratives, but at the same time, you had to deal somehow with the national narratives, the national memories, the national sensitivities at the same time. So I would be curious, how could you somehow deal with that? And I would be interested in what are the concrete common European values that you identified, the common traditions, the common references through the events that are presented there. We saw, for example, from the 70s, from Western Europe, what was important. Is there the Eastern European part represented as well? So what are the common values that you identified?
Thank you for the question. I will try to divide it in two. First, maybe some comments on what you have decided to take up here for discussion, this grand narrative. I would not say that our museum is a museum of a grand narrative, but maybe this is also because it depends how we define this term. I think it has gained a bad name, not because of the scope it covers. So for me, I could say grand narrative for anything that's it just covered a wide breadth of geography and history. But I think if grand narrative means that the history that the museum or historian tells, it's very, how to say it, it's directing too much the interpretation of the visitor, then this is not what we are doing. So if grand narrative is telling the visitor what they need to think about their national or European or even regional, I don't know, history, then this is not what we are doing. On the contrary, we are trying to develop critical thinking and to put different, even, let's say, former grand narratives side by side to show I think that, okay. There was a stop in the system. We use this term of multi-perspectivity. It sounds fancy, but actually what we try to do is to show sometimes one historical event from the different perspectives that it was looked at by different communities and in different times. And I will just give an example, so to make it clearer. And the example is the Shoah. We have a room which is called the Memory of the Shoah. So we deal with the Shoah, of course, in its historical context, when it happened during the Second World War. But in the section dedicated to the 50s and 60s, we have a separate room which is called the Memory of the Shoah, in which we look at how different countries, also at different times, have dealt with this historical trauma. And we have 6 countries that we look at, 3 from Eastern Europe and 3 from Western Europe, because that's also a big difference. And we show the different degrees of denial, let's say at first, and how it was justified, and also how in Eastern Europe all this narrative of the anti-fascist fight took over whatever you could say about the Shoah and the Holocaust. So we look at it, and I think this gives our visitors an idea that history, at least in the 20th century, has also been, history and memory had also been an instrument of politics. It has also been used not only by dictatorial regimes. I mean, here in Eastern Europe, we know it very well, and in a way it's easy to talk about this, but it's also these grand narratives that are starting to fade now. So I would say our museum is not a grand narrative of European history. We try to be honest about what European history is, and I think you saw in the movie that we use a lot of words that contrast each other. So I'm not sure if the sound was good enough so you could hear also the comment, but we talk about trauma, we talk about war, we talk about atrocities, we talk about untamed power. This is about 19th century and colonialism, but also how we were able, we as Europeans, how we were able to overcome it. There was a second part to the question, which was about the values. Again, we don't think it is our place to decide what are the values of European history, but we do have a section which is called European Heritage, in which we identify 16 themes that have shaped European history, that have more or less originated in Europe, and again, that are still relevant today. And just to give you an example, we start with philosophy, democracy, rule of law, and then we also have, in these 16 topics, we also have less flattering ones, like slave trade, which I would say it is a reference to freedom. So if we talk about freedom, we also have to talk about how Europeans were involved in denying freedom to other people. So we talk about slavery. We have a guillotine representing not only revolution, but also state violence. I think it's revolutions, is industrialization, is social movement. So it's like 16, but it's, as I mentioned, let's say less flattering ones because they are not values. It's just, I like to say when I guide in the museum that it's truly like family heritage, because you inherit things that are, you don't choose what you inherit. You can inherit a nice house, but you can inherit also a messy situation. So it's just heritage, and how you deal with it, it's very important.
Thank you. That's an interesting approach. I think we should continue with the Polish History Museum. We cannot see the exhibition yet, but I know that the concept and the structure is already done. So I was wondering, how did you choose the dominant narrative among the several competing narratives on Polish national history? And the question is a bit the opposite of the House of European History. So how a national history can be universal, or should it be universal at all, or it's not the goal?
Thank you. I think, first of all, that it is not like this, that we have historical knowledge and then we think what should be our narrative. That the narrative, especially national narrative, is to some extent shaped by tradition. So it's, this is a very important thing. So if we, for instance, in 3 weeks, we will open a big exhibition on shaping Polish historical narrative, starting from medieval times until 21st century. So this is an important thing. Secondly, we of course are not passive in this attitude toward tradition. First thing, because in museum we are professionals, we are also historians, so we have to make a certain sort of critical approach to this narrative. So say, oh, this is not true. So we should not use this or that topic or present it in this way as it was traditionally presented. So this is one thing. And secondly, positive approach, positive changes. We should bring something new, because we are a new generation and we have our topics. So history telling is not only referring what is in old books or what is meant by historical, in present historical research, but also deciding what is important to us. And if we are in a democratic society, if we are part of the European Union, if we have or try to have friendly relations with neighboring countries, we also shape our narrative to some extent with the view of these facts. So if I presented here a couple of things, for instance, Confederation of Warsaw or Union of Lublin document or the strike in Gdańsk shipyard, it is important. These are important elements, and these are important elements both to us, to Poles, because we remember those things, we have these things in our textbooks, but I think it also has some meaning for a foreigner who come to Poland and will be interested in Polish history. So national elements of national history can be universal. It's not that you choose either national or universal values. And values, it is very important. So it's like in the family. You tell some stories. For instance, when I was growing up, my mother brought me to the cemetery where lies my grandfather, who was in the concentration camp in Stutthof. And so this was the story that I grew up as a child. And this the same is for the national history, that if you have the stories, you also learn certain values. So values like freedom, like responsibility, like tolerance, can be taught by teaching history, by telling stories. And what is very important, that those stories also form a sort of set of symbols we use in public life. One of the things that we always debate in the European Union, that we don't have European public opinion. Yes, we don't have, because we don't have many common stories to tell. Or if we have even common stories, we have problems with agreeing how to interpret these stories. And so I still see deep sense in keeping national narratives, although also in revising national narratives, because this is the space where we debate about politics, about values, and it can be not replaced simply by any sort of artificially created set of values. This is interesting. If we see euro banknotes, you don't see historical figures, you don't see historical moments, you see only architecture, because this is the least common denominator of our values. I don't know if it is good or bad. We can discuss about it, but it's a fact. So in order to keep democracy running, we still need to tell stories, and we still need to convey certain values to another generation. So we still need tell, but also revise narratives.
Thank you very much. Audrey, in your case, I think it is obvious, and there is no doubt, that a national library has a crucial role in preserving national heritage and national values. But at the same time, it's a question how it can affect narratives, if it can at all, and what role does it play in national identity in terms of the wider public, and is it somehow fitting into a broader context, a European context? What's your thought about it?
I certainly think, I don't know whether this is working.
No.
Maybe they'll get me online.
No, we should switch it.
I'll try the other one. Is that working? Oh yeah, perfect, thank you. That's a great question, because I think it's everything. I think it's the local, the national, and the pan-national within the European, and indeed in the Irish context, no less so than in the other representative nations here on stage, there's the diaspora, because every European nation, more or less, has a diaspora. Certainly the Irish do, the Polish do, and we're very conscious of that within the national narrative of the national cultural institutions, I believe, in Ireland, because we would probably not have attained independence without that diaspora. So if you don't include all three of those subsets, you're in trouble. So I think we're very conscious now if you are a cultural leader, particularly in the context of a cultural institution, you must be aware of the criticism that may come to you if you haven't been as inclusive as possible of all narratives within a wider narrative. So the result, what what that means is that you more or less have to have, let's say, main exhibitions, even online as well, in terms of not just the physical, but you must have these subsets of other minority opinion. And I would use that word very lightly. I have a problem with the term minority because it's still of your country. Therefore, it is just as valid as something that might have been the more traditional majority opinion. So, for instance, one way we've looked at that over the last maybe 7 years in the National Library of Ireland is through a thing called our EEDI committee, which is from all aspects of the entire staff of the National Library. And it feeds into acquisitions, it feeds into public programming, it feeds into well-being and human resources, but it looks at things like equality, equity, diversity, inclusion in terms of what we should be actually acquiring. Because as you saw there in one of my slides, you know, our national legislative remit is very, very wide, no more so than, let's say, the Polish History Museum, whereby you have to collect everything. You know, certainly in the Irish context, you would be rightly critiqued very strongly if you didn't collect LGBTQ, if you didn't collect referendum results, the yes campaign and the no campaign. You must be very conscious of everything being acquired in perpetuity. That's not to say that you're not selective in your collections development policy. And I think it's actually the collections development policy that's much more of a crucial area for future development than, let's say, the exhibition. The exhibition is the public dissemination and interpretation of that, but actually it's your collections policy that is the core of your institution, because that is what everybody can and cannot see. It is literally your holdings. And obviously, you know, with the House of European History and building on from scratch, you know, that was fascinating to listen to, and how, you know, you're building a collection over that period of time from a baseline. That's, you know, that's basically what a lot of these other national museums were doing in the 18th and 19th centuries. It's just a kind of late 20th century interpretation of that. So, you know, there's great validity in I think, the actual act of acquisition. But you must be very aware of all viewpoints. So, for instance, with the Band-Aid archive, I mentioned that Bob Geldof gifted the National Library. Obviously, that was to do with famine in Ethiopia in the mid-1980s and the huge European and even Western response, if you think taking North America to that. But in the context of the early 21st century, we will have to look at the fact that that was a massive act of generosity by millions of people. But it was a legacy of colonialism in that part of Africa, which was from the European nations, that led to that famine. You ultimately can trace it all the way through centuries, all the way up to that time in the 1980s. So that has to be acknowledged within the context of an early 21st century exhibition.
Thank you very much, Audrey. And Barbara, in your case, I suppose that was a dilemma, whether as the site has a huge historical importance, whether to present the local history, the history of that specific place, or throughout that historic place to tell a more universal story of the Holocaust. So how did you choose between these questions, or is it a choice or not? And what side of the Holocaust did you choose to present or highlight? Mm-hmm. Because we can approach it from many different points of views.
So, at Mauthausen, there is no choice. Mauthausen has multiple functions, and the place means a lot in many different ways. So Mauthausen and Gusen and all the other places I speak for. Mauthausen is a killing site. Mauthausen is a cemetery. Mauthausen is somehow a monument, a place with many monuments. And today, and this is a kind of new development, Mauthausen is a place of discussions, a place of where people come together, a place of education. And it's also a museum, so we have a couple of exhibitions there. So there are several different functions, and it is not the choice, this or that, it's all of that. And that makes the place what it is today. And I think it's also it's not a job, it's a mission. I'm convinced that we have to preserve all these different narratives. They come together in Mauthausen at that place, all the different kind of traditions of commemoration from different countries, from different victim groups. They all come to Mauthausen. And it's good that they come to us. And we have to preserve it. And on the same hand, we have to invite maybe the next generation to say, okay, what do you need to create your own identity, way of thinking, your own tradition of how do you understand this place and how do you would like to commemorate. And this is, I think that is maybe the key. We used to say it's all about education. So for the young generation, it's of course the question, how can we support them that they understand what happened? When we think of that place and they say, okay, do we still need this place? So we often get this question. And we say, well, of course. Of course. Because we deal with history, but not only. We ask the question, how could that be that in middle of a civilian society, millions of people, and for Mauthausen, almost 100,000 people were murdered? How could that be? But we have always to build a bridge to the present. And additionally to that, we ask the question, and what does this have to do with me? How I am related to that history? And it would be too easy to answer all these questions. I think it's the idea of our educational concept that we raise questions. And I think, Simina, you mentioned that already, that we have to create spaces where we can reflect, we can discuss, we can talk about values, and we can discuss all together what we can learn out of it. And maybe Mauthausen is also special for the different ways of traditions, how we commemorate. So Mauthausen is a place for different national commemorations. We have the place with the national monuments. And this place, specifically this place, shows the history of the last almost 80 years. So we still have the monument of the DDR, of the Soviet Union, of Yugoslavia. This is history. And we see people and groups of different nations coming to our memorial, and we help them to commemorate today. And this somehow that we create day by day the new memorial. It's not that we finish it. It's always an ongoing process of developing the tradition of commemoration. Then we have the collective commemoration. We have different victim groups where we can commemorate. And we have the individual part. And this gets more and more important because of our research, ongoing research. It is today possible to commemorate for individuals. We have the names, we have the stories behind the main history. And I think that is also a key when you ask what we specific talk about. I think with a single life story, you can reach a lot when you talk about an object and the story behind that. When you talk about a family, the fate of a family, what happened with the family, and what do you know today? And in our work, we are always related to all these single stories, to a family story. And I think we would like to invite people coming to our memorial to be part of this exchange.
Thank you. There is so much to talk about, but the most important thing that we would like to give the opportunity to the audience. So who has a question for the panelists? Yes, the lady right there. I think you will get a microphone.
Thank you. My name is Heta Hedman. I'm from Historians Without Borders. Thank you for very interesting presentations and discussions. What I'm thinking about is that hopefully, you know, all of your museums and memorials have very diverse visitors who have very different narratives, conceptualizations of freedom, etc. So how do you negotiate these on a daily basis? For example, at guided tours, you know, how do you communicate and where are the limits? Of course, because you have to keep the historical facts. So this is one question that I would be interested to hear more about. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I think it is a common dilemma for all of you. So very briefly, Audrey.
It's a great question. We certainly would be very much about presenting everything that happened, whether it be the contents of the material itself in terms of the story of Ireland or the building. The building has become very interesting in recent years because we have, let's say, the 4 continents as opposed to the 6 represented in terms of the plasterwork, particularly North America and Africa, in a very 1890 way as opposed to 2024. So we would point that out rather than just skim past it and ignore it. And also we are very conscious of autism in particular at the moment, and we're looking at specific training in the area to try and bring in people with neurodiversity into the National Library in much more of a strategic way than before. Thank you. Simina?
Thank you for the question. I think there are many ways to answer this, but I would just choose to focus on the topic of museum education because I think that's where you were pointing out. We didn't talk about that. And I think for our museum, which is very dense in its permanent exhibition, the educational programs are actually the ways in which we can talk about topics such as freedom, which are not directly let's say, highlighted in the permanent exhibition, so we don't have a room or a floor dedicated to freedom. But for example, next year we will have the whole events of the year under this topic of freedom related to the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. So in a way, this allows us, with our educators, to look at our permanent exhibition in from a certain perspective and to discuss it with our visitors, because as I understand you do this at Mauthausen and we do it too, we really want to be a safe space for discussion about difficult topics, because European history has many difficult topics, especially in the 20th century. So we want to discuss those and okay, I wanted to, okay.
Then let's move on to Barbara.
I will remember the... Okay, please.
Is it on? Yeah. Thank you for the very interesting question, which we've been dealing with, maybe we're still dealing with that, the question of limit. This is very, very important for us, because I think in our specific case, we made it maybe too comfortable for ourselves for the last many years to say that the place itself is our limit. And yeah, we sit here and wait for people coming to our memorial, and then we talk to the people at our memorial. That's too simple. And we realized and we understood that we have to get out of our places. We have to go directly to the people, to their reality. And only one example that we realized, you showed the slide of social media work. So in our case, we understand social media somehow not only as a way of communication, but also as a tool of education. We decided 2 years ago to go on TikTok. That seems really simple, but we were totally against TikTok. And then we were invited by a group of memorials in Europe to say, let's try it, only to think about it. To think about what does it mean to open, to open our ideas to not only to the people coming to the memorial, to open our ideas to everybody and our content. And It took us 6 months for preparation to find our own way and our own way of creating these videos and the content behind that to go on TikTok. And so we did it 2 years ago. And what we realized is how many people we can reach with that. And we get the feedback from educators, from students to say, is it okay that we can use your TikTok video for a preparation before we can come to your place? So then we realized this is a part of our education, because we see the visit of our memorial is only one part out of 3. It's first, in the best case, you have the preparation, then you have the visit itself, and then you have the time for the reflection. And of course, you can do everything at our place, but we engage and we support all the institutions that they are partners, they become partners, and they can do the preparation at their time. And so TikTok becomes a functional kind of preparation with that. And when you go there and you see the videos, I mentioned one video out of all this. We have a video which was seen by more than 800,000 people. So this is more than we have visitors a year. So this is a huge, and still an ongoing question about the limit, so I'm sorry it was too long.
Not at all. And finally, Robert.
I think creating a museum, but also running a museum is constant dialogue and constant negotiations, internal negotiations. Because if you create a big exhibition, we will have over 7,000 square meters. You need to negotiate within your team, because people have different points of view. They belong to different generations. They have different political sensitivities. So this is first level of negotiation that you have. Secondly, we have so-called council. It's sort of advisory board to the museum, nominated by a minister, and we have there historians, senior museum professionals, etc. And because we have already 18 years, so we had different councils formed of different personalities by different ministers of different parties. So we had to negotiate with each of those councils about the topics and the content of our future permanent exhibition. And finally, from the very beginning, we took decision that we should not wait for money and then for opportunity to create a nice building, spectacular building, but we started with making projects, exhibitions with other institutions, educational projects, research projects, etc. So this was also a way of being engaged in the dialogue with audience, and each exhibition is also opportunity to meet people, to hear what they think about this, and also to meet journalists, to be sometimes have nice comments, but sometimes critical, etc. So we need to be responsive, and also we need simply to watch media, to read books, etc. to know what is going on. It's one of the difficulties in a big museum that before. If you start at some point and before you finish the work, it takes sometimes several years. So certain topics are presented differently, and it's very difficult sometimes to be fully up to date. Well, it's a very difficult process, but anyway, we can, for instance, make certain adaptation by making temporary exhibition. This is also the way a museum works. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. Other question from the audience? I can see several questions, yes?
Thank you very much. Johannes Schraps, I'm a member of the advisory board from Germany. First of all, I would like to thank Robert once more for inviting all of us here to Warsaw. and also thank the panel for the insights so far. I would like to ask about the responsibility of the existing memorials for places where we don't remember properly yet. Barbara, you mentioned Gusen a little bit. We just had a very interesting event last week in Berlin where we discussed about the movie from Marek Zając about Gusen, and that was, from my perspective, very impressive, but also a movie that made very sad, because it seemed as if there is no proper remembrance in Gusen yet. What responsibility do memorial sites, existing memorial sites like Mauthausen, have for other places where there is no remembrance yet? Thank you.
Thank you. And there is another question from the lady, and maybe we should collect them and answer them collectively.
Thank you so much. My name is Tatiana Krykovska. I'm working for NGO in Ukraine, Tolerance in You, and thank you so much for all the input that you made. It was really important for me also to visit Gusen and Mauthausen, and what we are doing, we are trying now to learn also methods that you are using in, let's say, culture of remembrance, to also implement them in Ukraine, to reflect how could we also remember crimes of Russia on the territory of Ukraine. And we are reflecting now. My question is not easy, but still it's very valuable for me to hear your reflections. So we were teaching never again, and all our seminars were based on this, all international youth exchanges. I'm asking myself, what are we teaching now? Because we already have participants who say, but it's again. What could be our new narrative? What could be the main idea why we are doing what we are doing for you? Thank you.
Thank you. And there is one remaining question from the lady in pink.
Thank you. Yes, thanks again very much for your comments and presentations. I thought they were very powerful. I'm Audrey, a master's student in Central East European, Russian, Eurasian Studies. My question is actually for Barbara. I am very interested in your project in Langenstein. I'm sorry for my German, don't know it yet. And how the residents participated and how they responded to your project, because of course you had participation, but were there any resentment or apathy towards the project? And yeah, because we've seen residents who live outside these sites often have this memory saturation. So yeah, did you have any problems or challenges? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, and one last question. This is the last question because we have little time remaining and a lot of questions.
My name is Aurel Bekteshi. I'm part of the representative group of Albania, and I have a question from our group that it is the memorialization of the remembrance for tens and hundreds of records of historical events of the past. Has it gone through some, let's say, obstacles, and how has this been gone through and has been followed by academic circles and the young generations? Thank you.
Thank you. And now, Barbara, maybe you were involved directly in the questions.
They're all good questions. Responsibility of memorials today. I think that would need a separate conference and to fulfill many days to talk about it. What are we responsible for? So we have a memorial law, and all our responsibilities are written in this law. But on a moral sense, what can we see our and understand our work as a kind of support. I think it's, on the one hand, we're responsible for several places. So Mauthausen was opened as a memorial already in 1949, as I mentioned already. So Gusen is a totally different development, and I would say it was the initiative of the survivors in the 1960s to save, to preserve the former crematorium and to create a memorial. They spent their own money to create a memorial in Gusen. On the other place, Mauthausen, was already a state memorial. And it was in 1997 that the Republic of Austria became responsible for the memorial in Gusen. So we have already a memorial in Gusen, and now is the process to create a bigger memorial with the new properties which were purchased from the Republic of Austria. And this we created as a participation process. Then we are also responsible for some other places. It's historical reasons. It would be too long to explain that. It's the former concentration, the sub-camp in Ebensee and in Melk. But there were more and more places. And they were totally neglected and I think I would say in the Austrian remembrance way of the last almost 80 years. And I think it would be the wrong way to go to every single place and say, okay, now we're here, we have the money, we have the responsibility, we create on every single place a new memorial. I think, so we are convinced that we would like to support the region, the village, the local initiatives to say, what do you need to understand? What do you need to understand what happened in your place, in your village, in your region? How can we support you with our educational approach, with our research, with our knowledge of how can we remember on a place or on places where you have really nothing. You have no place, you have no historical site, you have nothing. And we created also a kind of participation process we created a common sign to put on every single place as a kind of symbol. This place belongs to Mauthausen. And again, it's not our way to go there and say, okay, now here's the sign, and here was the subcamp of Mauthausen. So we wait till people come to us. Because then we know they are ready to talk about it. They are ready to face their own history in their street, in their village, in their region. And then it becomes bigger and bigger, like a movement, and then you have the school with projects, and then they come to Mauthausen. We opened this, we installed this sign in a small village close to Vienna, in Hirtenberg. There was nothing. No one was interested in the fact that there was a subcamp of Mauthausen. Now there is a huge project in school, and they come to Mauthausen, and they are in a cooperation with us, and it gets bigger and bigger and become more and more important. And now they are already thinking of building up an exhibition and so on. And this is a really powerful movement in this little village. And we hope that we can support, with this example, support many, many other places to develop their own memorial. And this is a kind of they create a new tradition, a new way of commemoration. And I think this is the key. And then we are proud being responsible, being part of this process.
Thank
I
you,
hope this answers. I'm sorry, never again. I think we use this maybe as an excuse that we talk about never again and never again. But when we do nothing, it's never again doesn't exist. So we see this everywhere in Europe, also in Austria. I underline education is the key, that we can start thinking of speaking it loud, never again. And the participation process, it would be, again, a long story.
Maybe I will give the opportunity for Robert to answer those questions, okay? Robert?
Okay. I think this is what is in my mind very important to this question about Ukraine is that the war started with very important input of certain historical vision by Russia. And it's very important that Putin, a couple of months before the invasion, Russian invasion, published an article about historical unity of Russian and Ukrainian nation. We see how looks the unity and this fraternal attitude of Russia toward Ukraine. But it's deeper. Russia never underwent taking a serious account with communism. And this is, in my opinion, a very deep thing. So if the history should not repeat itself, perhaps it is important that we have open democratic debate and that we openly also debate about totalitarian crimes, etc. And if in Russia, still today, people like Stalin are venerated as grand heroes, if Russia denies cutting crime, etc. So it's nothing strange that they also have history understand as a sort of weapon, an element of aggression against the other nation. There's a very symbolic fact that chairman of the Russian Society for History is Narishkin, is head of the special services in Russia. It's possible probably only in that country. So what we do with open debate, with debating also difficult questions between Poles and Germans, between, I don't know, Hungarians and Romanians, etc. It's very important process, democratic process. This is very, very important to us.
We have 2 minutes left. I don't want to put pressure on you, but if you want to answer, 1 minute. Do you want?
I would like to say just a few words. I'm not sure I understood the last question, so I don't know how to answer to that. I don't know if that was for me.
Could you repeat it?
Sorry?
Sorry if it wasn't very understandable, but just let me read it again. So the question is, the remembrance materialization, the process that you're undertaking, for countless 100,000 events that have happened, has it gone through obstacles from many different parts of politics, society, and state? And how has this gone through and has been expected or welcomed by academic circles and by the younger generations? So this is the question, the feedback.
So if I understand correctly, the reception of the work of your institutions throughout the exhibitions, the programs that you organize, what is the feedback, what is the echo of these events among academic circles and the wider public in 1 minute, Simina.
Okay, now I will not be able to answer that. Maybe just to say that we are among the museums in Belgium, the ones who have the highest percentage of Gen Z visitors. So we really do have a lot of schools and groups and education programs. I just wanted to make a small comment on the question which was obviously for you, the question of never again, but which I think is also very relevant for my institution. I would just say that never again, for me, it's not a promise. So it's not something that we have achieved and we are giving to next generation. Look, we have done this. This will not happen again. Unfortunately, it should be a personal pledge that each of us make sure that at least in our head and in our heart, it doesn't happen again. And I think that's the only way. And this is why the educational programs that you do and that we do are very important, and that's the only way to achieve it. So I think this would be my hopeful message, that we should not be discouraged if it is happening again, as it is, and it has been, but that's one, and just another reason that we have to teach about this.
And the closing remarks?
Just very, very briefly, what that reminds me of is Seamus Heaney, because obviously I mentioned he was originally from Derry in Northern Ireland, but was seen as an Irish statesman. And he was one of the few to be in receipt of a signed copy of the Good Friday Agreement, where all of the leaders signed a copy, which are rare. So just to say that poetry, art, music, that if you have people like that representing your nation, whereby those sorts of ideals are upheld, justice, peace, reconciliation, treating everybody equally, you will be okay. You will be okay. But you have to work hard at it. And education is the key at primary and post-primary level.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the audience for being here with us today and for your attention. And thank you for the participants. It was a pleasure meeting you and talking to you, and I think it was a very fruitful discussion. So thank you very much. And now it's break time.